I am Brad Keelor. They are Chadi El Mohtar and Niveen Abi Ghannam. Find out next on Director's Cut all about New Beaujolais and how it was imported to West Lafayette. Hello again, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Director's Cut. My name is Brad Keelor. I'm the director of the Geo-Institute, and that is why we call this show Director's Cut. Every week, I sit down with a different GI member who will tell us lots of things about themselves. Some of them are personal, some are professional. All of them are fun. This week, we have a lot going on. It is a very special Director's Cut because this is our very special Thanksgiving episode. And as you can see behind me, we have some nice Thanksgiving decorations. And as you can see, my guests dressed for the occasion as well. This also marks the very first time in Director's Cut history that we have a non-GI member on the show. So this is very exciting. And joining us this week from Austin, Texas, where you may have heard that there is a small university that has a football team and a small little basketball team and a small little baseball team and also like a civil engineering department. I mean, I've heard, I don't know. And joining us from that department are these two individuals. It is Chadi El Mohtar. It is Niveen Abi Ghannam, who both have different roles in the department. They will tell us a little bit about that in a moment. So first, happy Thanksgiving, guys, and thanks for doing this.
Happy Thanksgiving. We're glad to be here.
And I think we're going to do our best to have some fun today. We have to begin the same way we begin with all our other guests, and you each have to describe your job in 45 seconds.
Go ahead.
Me first. All right. I teach engineering communication at the University of Texas at Austin. My classes are basically meant to teach engineers how to communicate about technical knowledge through different ways. They write about them, they communicate verbally about them, they learn how to create metaphors and analogies to describe technical concepts that they're learning about in college. And the goal of the course is to make them strong communicators so that they can later communicate with all sorts of audiences about the different engineering concepts that they work with.
And I work on ground improvement and grouting and flow through porous media. Not nearly as engaging maybe, but very, very exciting. And part of teaching, I guess, is a lot of communications. And that's where we spend a lot of time arguing about communication skills.
Teaching is not communication.
There you go. And so part of my job is being, I guess, an entertainer, trying to get the attention of the undergraduate students and keep them engaged. But a big part is getting them to learn about geotechnical engineering and learn about why it's exciting, especially that we usually don't get to the undergraduate till later on. So trying to get them more excited and recruit the best ones to come to geotech.
So we will talk a little bit more about both of your roles as we move through the interview. And Chadi, you mentioned something here that, I go through the same thing. I think my wife thinks I'm a terrible communicator and that I'm too informal. That's always the knock she puts on me. So this is another one for both of you. What professional trait do each of you constantly remind the other partner about?
You want to go ahead?
Well, how much time do we have? For him, my major thing is he's too loud. I think like the thing that I actually keep reminding him of is how many emails do you have unanswered? And that, why do you have 1,500 emails in your account that, you should get back to people faster? So that's my main thing with him.
Yeah, with her, I think I just have to keep reminding her that us engineers, it doesn't come as natural to us to be communicating in a very effective way, especially when it comes to verbal communication, probably more than written communication. And we tend to have a very black and white and very more straightforward way of saying things, and not as diplomatic. And she's learning that by having to deal with us. I think first time she went and taught an engineering communication class, she came back and she's like, I think this is going to be interesting. A lot of things I've been trying to understand with you, turns out it's with all engineers, it's not just you.
But, you know, so Niveen, you're going to have to put on your horrified face here in a moment. Quick check in my email box reveals that there are 3,698 unread messages, and total items are 111,296.
Oh, man.
It's not something I'm super proud of, but, you know, a lot of those are CCs, and at least that's what I'm going to tell you right now.
Yeah, you'll get to them.
Eventually. Not the ones from 2016 that are still. So we have to ask each of you a research question too while we've got you here on Director's Cut. And Chadi, you're going to be first. And this is a hilarious Director's Cut moment, and I can't remember what your research question was that I was going to ask you. So we're going to turn it around and go this way. I know you best, I think, at least within GI, as being on our grouting technical committee and for working on our grouting conference that we do sometimes and that DFI does sometimes and that we do together sometimes.
Yeah.
What is one fact or one item about grouting that you have a hard time, see, that all comes back to communication, that you have a hard time communicating to your engineering brethren who don't work in that field?
That's a really good one. It's better than the one we were talking about earlier, actually. So I think it's one of those fields that's been so dominated by industry and not as much. It's one of those areas where there's been much more advancements occurring in industry, and research is kind of lagging behind as compared to other areas where research is 10 years ahead, and we're trying to integrate a lot of the research into the practice. And so the industry have done a great job of pushing the boundaries, but then there's still a gap when there's not all the research to support it. I think that's where a lot of this come into play. A lot of what I'm working on, a lot of why I got into the grouting, is that gap in knowledge between research and between application. The advancement in practice is going so far ahead, and it needs the fundamentals, the theory behind to keep up and to support it and to develop where we are. And so that's where a lot of my research goes into linking that gap in between the research and the basics and the practical applications. And it's kind of unique, right? Where you know, all the technical committees, we work so hard to try to get more industry into them because they're mostly dominated by academics. And the grouting committee, I'm the only academic in it, while it's all industry. So that's kind of reflection on that branch of geotechnical engineering.
So my follow-up question to that has to be this. How do you then work to bring in more academics or research into that world? I think another area that's similar to this is in aerospace, and we'll even go specifically, I think composites maybe too, where really industry is leading that and academia is kind of lagging behind, but there's a ton of money in it. And so there's always incentives for the academics to jump in because they know they can get funding and stuff like that. Grouting is not quite on that plane. So how do you push your colleagues to get into that field more and do more cutting edge work?
That's very interesting, right? And it is a tricky business because it's hard to get. It's traditionally been looked at as very practical. So when you try to go to traditional sources of funding like NSF or things like that, they would not fund much research in grouting because it's looked at as a very practical thing and not very pure scientific. And that's where I think a big misconception is, right? When I submitted my first career proposal on grouting and I had the word grouting in it, it was rejected right away because it's like, oh, this is very practical. You should send to the US Army Corps of Engineers or somewhere else, not to a science foundation. And then I repackaged the same proposal, and now it was non-Newtonian viscous flow through porous media, and suddenly it became much more scientific, right? The topic covered is still the same. So there's some packaging, some communication, and knowing your audience and who you're targeting in terms of how you put the package together. But also there's a lot of bringing in back the industry to the research table, and I keep bringing that up. You know, I'm involved with some industry affiliates program at the UT in petroleum engineering, where you have ExxonMobil and Shell and all those big companies. They come and they share their resources, they share their data with research at the university, because they know that this is going to be for the better development of that industry as a whole. And I think that's where we need to get the industry partners to buy into that. We're actually going to have a full panel discussion on that in the Grouting conference in New Orleans in 2022. On this particular topic, and try to bring more awareness and attention to that. This is definitely something that is still lagging behind, and that's pushing a lot of academics away from grouting because of it. So absolutely, we need to do a better job with that.
And a little shout out there for the Grouting conference coming up in just a few months. So now, Niveen, we have to ask you a similar type of question. And I think, you know, you've got a lot of experience talking to the engineers in the engineering community about how to communicate their work, how to communicate their science. You can go one of two ways with this, I think. What are your top tips for somebody who maybe doesn't have a person like you on campus with them? Or what are the top couple of mistakes that you see people making within the engineering field and communication, and how can they remedy that?
Yeah, so I think I'm going to address your second question first, in that most scientists and engineers, when you're write a report or an academic paper, you address it going with background, specific problem you're trying to solve, methods to solve that problem, results and conclusions. So you have to wait until the very end to basically say the most important thing, which in communication we call the inverted triangle approach to how to present your findings. But when you're talking to people outside of your discipline or field, you have to kind of flip that triangle and say the most important thing first, and then provide whatever background and how you got there afterwards. Because people, like, if you're talking to policymakers, if you're talking to journalists, or even to lay persons who are outside of your discipline, they care the most about what you found and how is that relevant to them, whether that affects the environment, their community, the roads they drive on. They care about that the most, and then they may ask you more questions about, how did you come to find this, or what was your process? So that's, I think, the main thing that that's the main difference between speaking to a technical audience versus a non-technical audience that many scientists and engineers do not understand, and so they end up using the same approach that they're used to in academic contexts.
Well, that's great. I mean, that's the same thing. I used to bring a lot of scientists to Capitol Hill to meet with their legislators, and that's always what we said is pretend you've got 30 seconds. And then if you get more than that, that's awesome. Like, you can start filling in that detail, but some people like to call it the elevator pitch. I can't use that phrase, but it's the same thing, I guess. So we have to do some fun questions on Director's Cut too, and we're going to hit a couple of those here coming up. The first one here is, do you remember the first time you sent an email? I think for me, it was 1994, 1995, and we talked before we started recording here, and the most amazing part to me was that someone responded to me. So what was it for you guys? When was the first time you sent an email, and who was it to?
For me, I think I was in middle school, and my friend and I were working together on creating emails for the first time. And I think we just emailed each other, and like the most cheesiest thing, me and her. And we waited for the other person to respond. And we were on the same computer, so we each would like send an email and then log out. And then the other one would check her email and then send back. So it was just like experimenting with sending emails that way. Yeah.
Yeah, I was much later to the game. I did not create my first email till I actually was applying to grad school in the US, and I had to put down an email. So I literally just created an email. There were few of us who were sending applications at the same time. And I think we all basically created our emails at that time. That was back already in 2001 or 2001, somewhere around that time. And we basically just send email to each other to make sure the email is working so we can put it down in the applications. And probably the only other time I checked that email was to check whether I got admitted to the university or not. It was the next time I actually logged in to check that email.
And that's why you have the 5,000 emails.
So I guess I still don't check that nearly as frequently.
But that's amazing to me. I mean, I am not a millennial. I'm a little too old for that, but I will sound like one here when I say you made it all the way through undergrad without an email account.
Yes.
Wow, that is incredible.
So many days.
That's amazing to me. I think over time, I think the thing that I've noticed, I don't know if you guys feel the same way, is it's become a much less formal means of communication. I think when I would send stuff in the 90s, it felt like it was there was a formula, like you had to put a salutation in there and then the body of the text, and you always signed it a certain way. And now I'll send a 2-word email and I feel no remorse about that. But
it goes in sequence, right? The same thing happened. Like then there was a stage where then 90% of the emails you get are forwarded jokes and stuff from your friends. And then it gets more to be business later on. It's kind of the same with text messages, right? When first text messages started, it was like, oh, you're sending a message for something meaningful. Then people start, oh, I can forward MMSs now. And then 90% of the messages you get are just forwarded junk. And now then people get out of that phase. It kind of goes in sequence, I guess.
I really miss the chain emails. One of my dreams as a teenager was to start one that would go all the way around the world. And I thought that was going to be like the coolest thing ever. Fortunately, I adjusted my goals and set more appropriate ones. I mean, I can only imagine how proud my parents would have been if I had been the originator of an email forward.
That made it all around. Yeah. Absolutely.
So I guess this one has to be just for Chadi then, because this is the other question we ask everybody when they come on Director's Cut is, how did you first get involved in ASCE and GI?
I guess with GI, we started the graduate student chapter when I was at Purdue as a graduate student back in 2006, 2007. So that was my first involvement, is getting the first graduate student chapter set up there. And then when I moved to Texas after graduating, one of the first services I got to do was actually be the advisor of the graduate student chapter here. So that was interesting to switch from one side to the other, just like, I guess, all the switches when going from graduate students to a professor, just going to the other side of the desk right away. So that was the first, probably the first very serious involvement, other than just being, on paper, signing up for student membership for ASCE. I think that was basically the biggest real deep involvement, was creating that graduate student chapter and getting involved with it. And I have to say, out of all the ASCE's institutions, I really appreciate how much GI focuses on students' involvement, whether it's making it easier for them to attend conferences or other activities that are organized. I think that's really great. Probably none was more evident than when we did the geo-congress, geostructures in Phoenix, and had to really cut back on how much students were involved in the conference because of working with SEI. I think that's something that sticks out for Geo-Institute, and I think that's something we should always keep pushing for.
So this is a great segue to talk about Geo-Congress this year, because of course a lot of stuff in the past couple of years has been weird. Geo-Congress in Charlotte in March, all the student competitions will be back. They will be live, they will be loud, they will be rowdy, just the way you like them, just the way you've remembered them. And it's going to be a lot of fun. So that's something to look forward to. You can get all the Geo Challenge information about the competitions at geoinstitute.org. Hopefully, if you're planning to compete, you already knew that, but there might be a few that you could still enter if you are so inclined. So you want to check those out. So now we get back into a few questions. I think all the rest of the questions are for both of you.
I'm going to take this one.
So festive, though. I mean, Chadi, I like that you're more hardcore about it. I appreciate
Absolutely.
that.
Plus, no one wants. It's been a long time since I got the haircut, so this is saving me.
So for both of you, what was the last non-work thing that you read? And it can be anything. It can be a cereal box, if that is the answer.
You're not too far off for me. I don't usually do reading for a lot of serious time, I guess, personal entertainment or anything like that. So most of the recent reads are sports articles that I mostly spend time on reading, and there's been plenty of them around our football team lately, unfortunately, for all the bad reasons. But yeah, I would say that would probably be the latest few things I've read are all just sports articles.
Mine are children's books, like we read with our kids every night. So many books. We get a lot of requests. I don't read, because I'm reading a book right now, but it's not really outside of work. It is relevant to the work I'm doing. It's called The Engaged Scholar by Andrew Hoffman. And it's about the academic culture and how it kind of pulls faculty away from being engaged in their societies. Like, for example, what Chadi was saying earlier, when he wrote about grouting, it wasn't seen as scientific or meaningful for an academic to work on it because it's very rooted in industry. And this is the academic culture that's pulling away faculty from being more engaged in real life problems and things, that matter to their communities, societies, and industries. But that's not too far off from what I work on. So I would say just our children's books.
Do you have a favorite or a least favorite children's book that you have read recently?
Oh, we hide the ones that we don't want to read. They're like in the back of, it's like, what was it? I hate that book. The one with the no pictures, the book with no pictures, because it has like all the silly words to.
So I have to know, a book with no pictures, is this like some Soviet era?
No, it's supposed to be a trick book that tricks older people to say all kind of weird sounds and voices. So it's called The Book with No Pictures.
That's the actual title?
Yeah, that's the actual title.
Oh, wow, we're going to have to look this up.
It's kind of like that book of the book about all what men know about women, and it's just empty white pages.
Inside.
Yeah, it's kind of like that.
But the kids love it.
Yeah,
and it's like,
for the exact reason why
it's painful to read.
Oh, wow. So I will put a link to this in the show notes so that when everybody watches it, they can go down there, they can click through, and they can find the book with no pictures, because that sounds amazing. I want to read the book with no pictures.
Only once, trust me. After you read it once, you're not going to want to read it again.
That's how you're testing me. We'll see. So one of the biggest areas where my wife and I are divergent people is musically. She's a top 40 person. She can turn the radio on and be happy with that for days and days and days. I grew up as, the ultimate like Gen Xer, like punk rock kid. And to this day, I still kind of, I'm probably the only institute director at GI who's listening to this stuff. So are there 3 bands that the 2 of you can listen to together and enjoy, or are your musical tastes very different?
Well, before we answer that, I would say, I think we're going to win this challenge. You're nowhere near as different about music than we are. Because I have 0 interest in music. I probably the one with the least musical ear ever. She always claims that I can never even clap on a beat.
You can't
stay on a beat. so that answers my part. So basically, I'm going with the flow with whatever she's doing because I have absolutely no preference when it comes to music.
Wow.
Yes.
Yeah, he's okay with whatever we play basically in the house, because now the kids and I are the ones who like get, to clash. Now that they have a taste in music and what they like to listen to, but at least like me and Sophie, our youngest, we like Taylor Swift and we like, country music. The boys are more into Imagine Dragons and bands that play more upbeat songs. But I'm interested in any kind of music. So
I have one on both of our cars. I have one channel, one preset channel for me, which is the one I listen to my sports radio cast on, and then the rest of the 50 pre-saved channels are for her and the kids.
So here's the thing: you live in Austin. I'm amazed by this.
Yeah, music.
He likes music, right?
But you're just pretty ambivalent about it.
Yeah.
So I think the other thing we have to talk about here, because this is one of my favorite GI memories. A few years ago, you put a post up, I think it was on Twitter, that at the beginning of every semester, there are a couple of Chili Peppers songs you play for your students. And one was I Like Dirt, and I can't remember what the other one was. The funny part of this story, though, is not that you play the Chili Peppers songs. You misspelled their Twitter handle and instead alerted all of us who follow you to a Scottish band called the Red Hot Chili Pipers.
Yes.
Like bagpipe versions of Chili Peppers songs, and they are amazing. And it got me following the Chili Pipers, and I will not profess that I have listened to them a lot, but this is one of my favorite GI memories. So you'll have to fill everybody in. Other than I Like Dirt, which I believe is on Californication, what is the other Chili Peppers song that you play for the students?
They have a song on Sand, called Sand, I think. That's, again, one of those things I can never remember the words of the songs afterwards. But I have basically a list. And at some point with Katrina, we were compiling the list on Twitter at some point. And I have a list basically of about 20 to 30 songs that I play in the beginning of each lecture. Today, I actually was playing a song in the lecture about a song that says, "My faith is like shifting sand, moving with every wave." And I'm like, this is so, always add a little of geotech to it, right? That it's geotechnically sound because it says shifting sand. If it says shifting clay, it wouldn't work because clay have cohesion and it have strength at the surface, whereas sand have no cohesion, so it's no strength at the surface, and that's why it shifts with every wave. So we add some context. There's landslide songs, there's quicksand, there's all kind of songs that are very fitting, and we have a discussion about them as whether they match or they are geotechnically solid sound or not.
Actually, right before this, I was telling him I heard a song for the first time today by Luke Bryan, who's a country singer, called it's one of the verses that you can't buy happiness, but you can buy dirt. So that's potentially something you can play in your class. And
Oh, I like that. So if anybody's interested out there, we made a playlist last week for the Geo Extreme Conference to play before and after the plenary sessions, and it was all songs about extreme events. So we had there's a Beck song called Earthquake Weather, and we had trying to think of some of the other ones on there. Rolling Stones, Give Me Shelter, and there are 25 or 30 songs. So everybody can check that out. And I'm going to go unearth Chadi and Katarina's list now of these great geotechnical songs, and we'll make a big deal about those on the Twitter. So we have 2 questions left. They're for both of you. I feel like for a long time, when everybody looked to the future, they would use 2030 as the year, the reference point. Well, that's 9 years away, so we're not going to do that anymore. So the question for both of you is, what's the biggest change that you see coming in your respective fields in 2050?
I think there's going to be big shift in terms of involving big data and involving finally starting to compile all this information we have in a much more effective way, and being able to take advantage of all the past experiences we've had and not having to reinvent the wheel on every project we're doing, and be able to move past that. I think there's a huge room for there. Obviously, soil is part of every project, every construction. So anytime we're talking about sustainability and being more conscious about the environment and everything, there's huge factors that play into that. With soil, we're running out of space in urban areas, so we ran out of going up because we lost the space to go up on. So I think there's going to be a lot of room for going down under, because that's the only place we're going to be able to find more space to create space. So underground, I think, is going to be big moving forward, because it's going to be hard to move people away from those urban communities, and there's not much room on top. So we might have to be much more creative about how to utilize the underground space.
I'm up for it. Niveen, what about you?
I think the main issue with science communication as a field is that we talk to each other a lot about the importance of communicating science to the public. And although scientists and engineers are our main target, we haven't talked much to them or with them. And most of the time it's because they're either not interested, or because academic institutions don't value this format of communication for scientists who are mostly faculty. But now with the pandemic, I feel there will be a shift in valuing communication more, because of how much misunderstanding the pandemic, and also the mistrust that people have in science and engineering. I think it's been eye-opening for many people in the medical field, but also in engineering and science, that no, there is a problem, and we need to address this gap in trust and gap in our communication with the public. So I'm hoping that this will be converging more in the future.
Well, that's great. I always love these speculative conversations too, because it always brings out the optimist in people. Very rarely do you get anybody who says anything negative is going to happen.
My field is going to collapse.
And that's
going to
really,
be alive
really happy.
2050.
So for our final question, I had to put this one in. One of the things that's really wild and really cool about Thanksgiving to me is it's just such an American holiday. Just about everybody celebrates it, whether you have just moved here or whether you've been here for 100 years. Everybody makes a big deal out of Thanksgiving. Both of you were born outside the U.S. and, we got the shout out. I see the little cedar tree behind you there in the background. So what was unique about your initial Thanksgiving experience in the U.S.?
He has a more interesting story.
So I'm going to say my first experience after I moved to Purdue, because that's where we get much more engaged. And the first time first year at Purdue, Professor Vince Drenovich and his wife Roxanne invited actually all the graduate students who were around for Thanksgiving that did not get to travel to come and attend a Thanksgiving dinner at their house. And they did all the traditional dishes and everything. And one of the interesting things with that is that we had one of the professors, he's retired by now, but Professor Philippe Bourdeau, who's come from France. He had just found for the first time ever, he was at Purdue for, I don't know, 15, 20 years by then. He had found this French wine that he used to drink in France. It's called Beaujolais Nouveau, which is basically a fresh wine that's shipped all around the world in that 1 week that happens to be the week of Thanksgiving. And you're just supposed to drink it fresh. And he basically bought a whole box of that and brought it, and it's supposed to be served chilly, but in November at West Lafayette, that's not an issue. Just leave it outside for 30 minutes and it's good to go. And so that was very interesting. And after we got married, I was mentioning that to her, and we've been actually getting that wine every year. We have the corks for the last 12 years since 2009, and we open a bottle of that on Thanksgiving Day, whether we're hosting or we're somewhere else. We take the bottle with us, and we always have one of those bottles of wine every year. And we find it every year at the local grocery store here. And so that was really interesting. It was a fun Thanksgiving. Get all the students there with Vince and Roxanne and Philippe and everyone else. And it created a tradition for us that's still going on till now.
And that is a super cool tradition. So what about now for you guys? Are there any Lebanese elements to your Thanksgiving celebration?
Yeah, we usually have Friendsgiving with our friends. We have many international friends in Austin, so we end up always hosting Friendsgiving at one of our houses every year. The pandemic was an exception, but usually we prepare some Lebanese sides, and each family would bring also their own some kind of international cuisine dishes, but we always have the traditional turkey just to keep it relevant. Yeah.
That's great. I think the final bonus question here is going to be, Chadi, you made a reference to UT football earlier. Are you not a Purdue fan at all now?
Oh, I am. And I have to say, I usually would say I'm more watch the basketball for Purdue and Michigan State and the football for UT. Although lately it's been equally bad, I guess.
Oh, that's right. I forgot you were a Michigan State grad too. You're on the wrong side of that one.
So I'm always keeping track of all the three teams and seeing what's happening. Purdue just beat my Purdue just beat my Michigan State football team, even though they were big underdog last week. So it's always fun to watch all three and keep track of what's going on. Higher chance that at least one is doing well and keep your spirits up.
That's true. You got a 1 in 3 shot.
Yes.
Guys, thank you for your thoughtful answers. This was fantastic. It's always really interesting when we have two guests together and they can kind of play off each other. And I think it's even more interesting when those guests are married to each other, because there's that extra special dynamic there that makes it really fun. This was a really good Thanksgiving show. So all you viewers out there, if you liked what you saw today, and I hope you did, you're here at the end, so I really hope you did. Click on subscribe, click get notifications. We'll let you know every single time we post something to the YouTube channel, which is super frequently. So Chadi and Niveen, thank you again for being with us today.
Thank you for having us. This was fun. And thank you for doing this and letting us to know about others as well.
Yeah, happy Thanksgiving.
We're going to keep going until, like I always say, until I get fired or until somebody tells me to stop. We will continue with Director's Cut. So to all our viewers out there, thanks for sticking around. Thanks for hanging out with us every week. And I hope you all have a very happy Thanksgiving. And we will see you with a brand new Director's Cut next week.
Thanksgiving, everyone.